I'm Elaine Reyes here in Washington, D.C. Welcome to America's Now.
First up, cry for help. It is one of the most isolated communities in the remote northern Argentine province of Formosa.
The general and serious problem that is happening in Argentina is the failure to apply our rights as they're enshrined in both the provincial and national constitutions.
Vulnerable and impoverished, the Guam indigenous are determined to make their voice heard.
This is a community that's been downtrodden for generations, practically wiped off the map.
Correspondent Daniel Schweiler went to the Guam community to show us what these native people have endured. Next, Open Forum, education in Latin America. Which countries are excelling in educating its young people and which ones need improvement?
Throughout the region, we have systems that are really underperforming.
We speak with Emiliana Vegas, chief of the education division at the Inter-American Development Bank, about changing the system. And then divine cocoa. The Mayan civilization believed that the cocoa plant belonged to the gods and that its pods were a gift to humans. Cuba's crop has its own unique flavor and aroma.
Cocoa is the life and the spirit of the Baracoans. Cocoa is present in the daily lives of farmers, workers, all of us, because for more than 400 years it has been bound to the economy.
But this ancient plant is struggling to keep up with the modern era.
You can't mechanize it. You have to do everything by hand. There are no machines for this.
As our correspondent Michael Voss found out, a famous Belgian chocolatier has found a new use for these pods, transforming this celestial gift into a luxurious chocolate bar.
Welcome to the broadcast. It's called green gold in Argentina, and for good reason. Soy is by far the top national export, representing more than 20% of what the South American country ships out. Foreign multinational corporations are dominating the soy industry, showing a hunger for more land to grow the crop. That has them turning their eyes to the forest of the Gran Chaco region, which has been home to native Argentinians for thousands of years. 30 ethnic groups form a community of more than 800,000 people in that region, and now they're at risk to lose it all, helplessly watching as foreign investors gobble up their lands. America's Now contributing correspondent Daniel Schweiler went to the remote Gran Chaco region and has this report.
This is Riacho de Oro, a Guam community, an indigenous village in the remote northern Argentine province of Formosa. Marginalized, forgotten, out of sight. It has no running water, and N.Y.C and her neighbors are forced to find it where they can.
When we haven't got water, we go to the water hole or get it from the tank or the lake. We get water to cook, to wash, for everything.
The Guam, or Toba, like most of what remains of Argentina's indigenous peoples, have been pushed onto scraps of land which no one else wanted. This is a community that's been downtrodden for generations, practically wiped off the map. They're now raising their voices to demand a few basic necessities that most of us simply take for granted. Valentin Suarez is a bilingual teacher at the school and a local leader in the growing campaign for the voice of the Guam to be heard at the provincial and national levels.
The water supplies are getting scarcer. All around you see are old wells from periods of drought when we took our shovels and dug until we found water. When the rain came, these holes were flooded. It's a homemade job because we don't have the money to buy bricks to make it permanent.
Another problem is land. Since many indigenous people don't have documents to prove their ownership, big agricultural corporations have been able to win legal battles to get their hands on the deeds.
When I was little here, everything was covered in forest, and now they've destroyed it all to grow genetically modified soy. Before, this whole territory belonged to the indigenous community, but they have taken it over, bit by bit.
Desperate and frustrated, the N.Y.C have resorted to blocking highways to call attention to their plight and save their land. But these confrontations can turn violent.
Our land was taken away by local and national police forces with the backing of the government. They brutally evicted our elders. It was a big operation in which nobody could defend themselves. We lived as nomads. At the time, no one could read or write, so they abused us with the backing of the police force.
During an eviction in La Primavera in the north of Formosa province, 2 protesters were killed and some police were injured. Some indigenous people were taken to a local hospital. Once the land is lost, there's nowhere for them to go.
You lose your land and then you're forgotten. You will have to move to the slum or I don't know where. Well, definitely the slum, because to buy something in town, for us, that's impossible.
Their problems are well documented in efforts to get the authorities to listen. Community elder Cirilo Gomez reads in N.Y.C, while local campaigner Alden Charoles translates into Spanish.
Por eso un día como hoy un día muy especial para que aquellos que tengan la posibilidad de ver.
Felix Diaz is from a N.Y.C community near the border with Paraguay and is emerging as a national leader, representing the demands of all of Argentina's indigenous peoples.
The general and serious problem that is happening in Argentina is the failure to apply our rights as they're enshrined in both the provincial and national constitutions. These are written guarantees of the rights of indigenous people, designed to protect the lives of every indigenous person.
With little response from the regional governments, Argentina's indigenous movement has moved to the capital, Buenos Aires, to demand an audience with the president, Cristina Fernández de Kirchner.
No, we don't have much hope. We've had many experiences with this president, and she won't solve the problem.
She has so far refused to meet them, despite these now weekly marches in front of the government palace. The history of discrimination and brutality goes back to when the Spaniards first set foot in America.
During the 19th century, desert campaign of General Roca, they sent the army to exterminate the indigenous people in an armed assault.
The desecration was so great that many, especially those in the cities, believed that Argentina no longer had an indigenous population. That perception is slowly changing. Indigenous campaigners establish links with those in organizations in the wider society, such as Aldo Echegoyen from the Buenos Aires-based NGO, the Popular Assembly for Human Rights.
This attitude of non-recognition is an attitude of discrimination. It's criminal and shows complete ignorance, absolute ignorance.
There are still many battles to be fought at both the local and the national levels. They say their relationship with the land is vital to their spiritual well-being. Meanwhile, most of Argentina's indigenous people must eke out a living the best way they can. A daily grind to find the basic necessities. Argentina does have an indigenous community, increasingly united and vocal, in touch with its heritage and fighting to be heard, fighting to find its place in a fast-moving, rapacious modern society.
As Daniel Schweiler reported, lands that once produced food for Argentinians are now producing profits for foreign corporations. The companies are making money by selling the food to people living in Europe, Asia, and elsewhere. Meanwhile, the deforestation in the Chaco region is moving faster than ever, more than 2 million hectares over the past decade. It's happening much faster than in Africa and close to what is happening in the Amazon region. Up next, development and education.
Coming up,
We look for governments that are open to learning from the experience, to evaluating what they're doing, to monitoring closely so that they can improve.
America's Now. Take a spark of intuition and a helping of inspiration, a dash of contemplation and a heap of experience. Add a good handful of character, then turn on the heat. We are CCTV America.
Welcome back. Reshaping education is a challenge being faced by many Latin American countries these days. It's a topic America's Now has been covering in depth for months, particularly in Mexico, Venezuela, and Chile. Joining us now to talk about education reform in that region is Emiliana Vegas of the Inter-American Development Bank. Her organization provides grants and financing to education systems throughout Latin America. Welcome to the show. You know, why are we seeing such massive protests in the countries that we just mentioned, like Mexico and Chile? Why is the education there so dysfunctional?
Well, it varies by country, and thank you for having me. In Chile, they have experienced huge growth in both students accessing all the education cycle, so from preschool to end of secondary, and students feel that they have the right to go to high-quality university education, and they're not prepared. So the education system actually is not producing the skills they need to pass the very stringent exams to get into the top universities. And then in Mexico, the government of President Peña Nieto has embarked in some very ambitious and politically sensitive reforms to try and improve the quality of teaching and learning in the Mexican education system, which is also fairly low compared to international standards. And those reforms imply, you know, a lot of changes in how teachers are evaluated, how they're paid, how they progress through the career, and that's pretty controversial.
We also want to look at the positive here. So which countries in the region should get credit for having a really good education system? And in your opinion, which country is the worst?
So paradoxically, two of the countries that you mentioned earlier that we were discussing with major protests have made important improvements. Particularly Chile is one of the top improving countries, the most rapidly improving countries in how much students learn in the international assessment called Program of International Student Assessment, PISA, which is run by the Organization of Advanced Economies, OECD. And I think in part because they have made such large improvements, there's social demand for even more. Throughout the region, we have systems that are really underperforming. And so, although not a majority of our countries participate in international assessments, of those who do, their students perform well below the average OECD country. And it's a real struggle for Latin America to match the improvements in access to education with quality.
So what do you look for when you're looking to support a school system in Latin America? What kind of criteria do you require?
One of the main criteria our organization looks at is to what extent are government officials committed to improving the education for those who are most in need. So we look at commitment to raising the quality of education for the poorest and most vulnerable populations. And we also work with political commitment to make decisions that really will impact the long term. Because education is a process that takes time to yield results. So it's not always very politically motivating for someone who's running for office to invest in those reforms that take time. In the end, it's more than building schools and opening doors to children. It's about changing what teachers do every day in schools so that students learn.
Something that's been a big topic amongst the different protests happening in Latin America has been the issue of free education. Do you think that free education is working, or do you feel like it's really the wealthy in some of these countries that are receiving a quality education?
Well, in many countries there are very important gaps in the quality of education that the wealthy and the poor receive. Nevertheless, free education in Latin America and the fact that many countries adopted free universal education has enabled the region to make immense progress toward achieving universal primary education. And you know, today one can say that with very few exceptions in Latin America, all children who are 6 years of age will be able to attend a primary school and will complete, and about half of them will go on to secondary education. So I think the challenge is not free education, particularly in primary and secondary, because I think countries are committed to that and are delivering. In Latin America, it appears that actually free university education seems to favor the wealthy more than the poor, and that it's better for governments to actually charge tuition, but differentiate depending on whether the student and their family can pay, and provide a lot of access to scholarships and credits to other students so that all can attend.
All right, Emiliana Vegas of Washington's Inter-American Development Bank, thank you so much for your time. We do appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
When America's Now returns, Cuban cocoa conquering palates abroad.
Coming up.
One always tries to find and plant the cocoa which gives the best results, the best profits. We're looking to make money.
America's Now.
There is no more they, or you, or me. In today's economic landscape, there is only we. An interconnected world of business, trade, and investment. Daily coverage told simply, with insight and new perspectives. Biz Asia America, our world of business.
We are CCTV America.
Welcome back. The Mexican custom Dia de los Muertos, or the Day of the Dead, is observed every year starting at midnight on October 31st. For Mexicans, family and friends gather to honor their deceased. During this two-day tribute, they'll build altars on which they'll place food, drinks, and gifts. It's actually the liveliest of holidays, bringing millions of people out into the streets for a festive and colorful celebration of death. Take a look at this beautiful tradition.
Long ago and far away, in the hills of Mexico, the ancient people who once lived there believed death was just a threshold to another existence. And so they celebrated the crossing from this life to the next. Today, the children of those ancients are still celebrating. Each year, when the nights grow long, they carry light and warmth to the resting places of their loved ones, just as their ancestors did. This is a tale of remembrance. This is the story of Noche de Muertos. Nestled in the hills of Michoacán in Mexico, just beyond the lake, lies the tranquil town of Pátzcuaro. It's a magical place. It's a place where fishermen's nets float like butterfly wings, and marigolds dance in the autumn breeze. It's a place where even death seems a little sweeter, where skulls are spun from sugar and skeletons can be spotted shopping, and graveyards are full of life. It is late fall, and in Michoacán, as in all of Mexico, Noche de Muertos, the Night of the Dead, approaches. It is a joyful time, for on the 1st of November, for one night only, nothing separates the living from the dead. It is time to call the beloved souls home. Marigolds lay upon graves like blankets of warm light. There are so many candles, it's as if the stars have come down from heaven to make the souls feel at home. In the warmth of the darkness, families gather closer. They are quieter now, and in the hush, they hear the whisper of what they already know. Our loved ones are not forgotten.
Dia de los Muertos has pre-Columbian roots and has been observed in various Central American countries for centuries. November 1st is a day to honor children and infants, and the reason Mexicans call it Dia de los Inocentes, or Day of Innocence. From a centennial celebration in Mexico to a centennial crop, Cuba is well known for its cigars, rum, and coffee. But back in Spanish colonial times, one of the most popular drinks was hot chocolate. Cuba still produces its own cocoa and chocolate, in particular around the town of Baracoa, which is located on the extreme eastern tip of the island. However, the industry is struggling to survive. One of the world's leading chocolate-producing nations, Belgium, is lending a helping hand. Here's Michael Voss with the report.
Jose Urbano is a third-generation cocoa farmer, and his methods and tools have changed little since his father's time.
It hasn't changed. You have to do everything by hand. There are no machines for this, so everything stays the same.
But earning a living this way is getting harder. Productivity is steadily declining. The majority of trees are old, producing less fruit and in need of replacing, while the average age of farmers is increasing. Jose Urbano is 75 years old and is concerned about how few young people want to stay on the land.
Already us old boys are disappearing, so we need young people who want to care for the cocoa. But the situation with cocoa is not good. It's hard work. If the cocoa paid better, if there was more development, then they would come because young people go where they can get results. The same as me, but unfortunately, or perhaps luckily, I will die here with my boots on. What can I do?
Now many wonder how much longer cocoa can provide an economic lifeline to what is one of the remotest and most isolated corners of Cuba. Most of the cocoa produced in the world these days comes from Africa, but just like tobacco and potatoes, it originated in the Americas, and they've been growing cocoa here in Baracoa for centuries. For a brief period, Baracoa was the first capital of Cuba, though today it's better known as the capital of cocoa. In the town center, there's a chocolate cafe which serves only chocolate ice cream. While a few doors down the street is the House of Cocoa, where the town's museum director and official historian, Alejandro Hartman, invited me for a drink.
Cocoa is the life and the spirit of the Baracoans. Cocoa is present in the daily lives of farmers, workers, all of us, because for more than 400 years, it has been bound to the economy. And it's not just bound to the economy, but also to our traditions.
Baracoa is also home to the island's oldest and largest chocolate factory. It was inaugurated back in 1963 by the Argentine revolutionary Ernesto Che Guevara. The machinery was supplied by what was then East Germany, and most of it remains in use today. Almost all the chocolate produced here is for domestic consumption. But Baracoa's traditional blend of old-fashioned cocoa beans is starting to attract international attention. Nico Regu Marcolini is co-founder of one of Belgium's most exclusive chocolatiers. The Pierre Marcolini shop in Brussels displays its chocolates in what look like jewelry cases with prices to match. Nico Marcolini now travels the world in search of unique cocoa flavors. She's developing a range of chocolate bars which, just like fine wine, have a denomination of origin, made from beans from just one region or farm. Baracoa is one of them.
It's something exceptional. The cocoa, a variety of Trinitario, which has evolved over centuries, and in such an isolated place, it is something very natural. This cocoa powder is a mix of different varieties and is very, very aromatic.
A Belgian trade union, which represents food industry workers, is funding a project in Cuba to help improve conditions and productivity on cocoa farms.
So this is where the track ends, and it's by mule now.
Yves van Giesel is a Belgian agronomist who spent the past 2 years in Cuba getting the project off the ground. Improving the mule runs is one of his priorities.
They pick the beans, and these beans need to get to the drying center quickly. If not, they will ferment, which damages and reduces the quality of the cocoa. But unfortunately, the farmers don't have the means to make or repair saddlebags for the horses, so we are helping to construct saddles and to improve the blacksmiths, which exists but is in poor condition.
Yves van Giesel is also working with farmers to plant new stock. Some of the cooperatives are starting to clear the land, making space for new cocoa trees. These ancient, highly aromatic plants, which could serve an important niche market in Europe, produce smaller pods and fewer beans than the mainstream varieties. Yet the state pays the same price per ton, no matter the quality of the beans. So there's little incentive for cooperative president Sabino Matos to stick to the old-fashioned mix.
In the case of the traditional cocoa, which has the best aroma, the cocoa pods are much smaller, yet they pay the same for these small beans as they do for the large ones. One always tries to find and plant the cocoa which gives the best results, the best profits. We're looking to make money.
Cuban farmers can't compete with the industrialized African cocoa plantations in terms of price, but they could be selling their unique quality beans for a premium abroad. Without these new markets, farmers like Jose Urbano may be the last to grow cocoa on this land.
Our thanks to Michael Voss for that report. The price paid by the government to farmers has no relation to the amount of work needed to take care of the crop. For that reason, many of them are mixing cocoa plants with banana plants. But scientists consider it a disaster for the cocoa because it has to compete with the banana for nutrients, light, and water. The government promised to increase prices so we can reverse the situation and stimulate cocoa production. That brings us to the end of our broadcast this week. We'd love to hear from you about this story and all our stories. Please write to us at an@cctv-america.com. Or you could send us a tweet. Our handle is @CCTV Americas Now. Please join us again next week for another edition of America's Now. See you then.